Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. I am Tanya Tang, Membership and Programming Director with CFA Society San Francisco. On behalf of the Society and our event partners, the Near East Silicon Valley, it is our pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Career Transition Investor Relations Discussion with Walter Pritchard. A quick item to note before we start, you will be muted for the event, so we encourage you to type your questions using the Q&A box. We will monitor the question closely and endeavor to answer as many as possible. Now, this event will be recorded and a replay will be shared. Now, I'd like to introduce Jeff Hamrick as our event moderator. Jeff was most recently worked as Senior Director at NASDAQ and has served as a board member of CFA Society San Francisco. Welcome, Jeff.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Walter Pritchard from Palo Alto Networks for joining us today for what will hopefully be an engaging conversation about his career and path along over the last 20 plus years. Walter, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So maybe we'll start with just a little bit of background of, my understanding was you were a chemistry major coming out of undergrad. Moved up to the Bay Area. What drove you from from chemistry to the financial markets?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. So I was, as a typical undergrad, you go into college, not exactly sure, you kind of know what you like, but you don't know exactly what you want to do. Ended up, really interested in the sciences. Did the chemistry major. Really liked the theory part of it. As I got further into it, it's all about spending time in the lab, and I joke that I was all thumbs in the lab, and really didn't envision my future kind of in the lab. And so I had a bit of a revelation my beginning of my junior year. Had a chat with the guy who was my advisor, a great guy named Fred Grieman, who just retired as a professor, and I sort of posed to him my conundrum, and he's like, "Well, my brother was a physics major and is now in the aerospace industry, and he's on the business side, and you should talk to him." So I had a chat with his brother and sort of realized I could continue on with this chemistry major, but I didn't need to be in the lab. So I continued on with the chemistry major, ended up doing some internship work after my junior year in finance, actually at a mutual fund, and decided I wanted to do something. I've always sort of said, I think I know what I want to do next, or I know which direction I want to point. So I did that internship, decided, okay, coming out of college, I like that direction. So I'll take a job in that direction. Ended up doing investment banking for a couple of years, which I think is a typical, you come out of undergrad and you want to do finance, but you don't know exactly what. You do an analyst role, did that for a couple of years, and then, moved into equity research because, met some great people and they got me excited about it. So that was the progression.
Got it. And so it was about 2 years on the investment banking side before moving over to equity research. And in that, a lot of people think of investment banking, equity research, it's all from these, large global boutique firms. Was there a significant difference in your day-to-day?
You mean between banking and research?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's banking is very transactional. And so, and I did banking during a time, it was 98 to 2000. So it was a very active time in the capital markets, lots of IPOs. And so you're just sort of one project to the next, or, 3 projects to the next 3 projects. And I think the pitch I had from the research guys was, hey, you come into research, you really get to get deep on some things and become an expert. And so that's what got me interested. I would also say the pace and lifestyle when I was in banking, I met my wife in college, we were getting married, and it was a bit of is this the lifestyle? The banking lifestyle can be tough. And I looked around at the guys in research and said that might look like a better lifestyle. So that also influenced the decision. But I think really the opportunity to kind of dive down in deep on an industry was what was attractive to me coming out of banking, where you're very transactional.
And when you started in research, has it always been on the technology side?
Yeah. So I did. It's funny. When I was coming out of the chemistry major, my dad actually, his advice was, well, chemistry and whatever. He didn't know any of it, right? But he's like, well, maybe you do something biotech or pharma. And Tech was hot. There were a couple firms recruiting for tech, and I could at least talk the talk on tech. I had done some like programming as it related to the chemistry work I had done. So there was a lot of opportunity in tech. Tech was kind of where it was at. I was in California, so I went into tech, and I kind of got lucky between, there's a bunch of different areas of tech. I chose, ended up going into software, even in banking, doing a lot of work in software, which was kind of right place at the right time. I don't know that I was that scientific about it. It was kind of like, that's where the opportunity was. So I went with it.
And I think software's been the right place, right time for 20 years now.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's funny, my initial opportunity in banking, it was between software and semiconductors. And now semiconductors are kind of back as well. And I ended up choosing really more personalities. There was a banker in software that I had an opportunity to work with that I really liked him. And so I just was like, okay, I like working with him, so I'm going to do software.
Wow, interesting. And so you started out in research, and around the global financial crisis, you moved from a very well-respected boutique firm to Citi, which is one of the global financial institutions we all know. In that change, was there things that were very surprising in that career change of going from a smaller firm to a global shop?
Yeah, so it's funny. Every time I've changed jobs, I've tried to get ahead of it and like talk to people that are in that area, at that firm, at a bigger firm. So everything I was sort of, all the work I did about joining a bigger firm, it definitely all played out. I mean, there's so many more demands on your time. There's so many more salespeople. There's colleagues in all industries, and so it was. I mean, going from Cowen to Citi was drinking from a fire hose for the first year and a half, and it was just trying to keep up with the size and scale of the firm. I not only I was covering, let's call it half of software at Cowen. I was charged with covering everything at Citi. So it was a big step up in just number of companies. My team grew by probably 2.5 times. We were global. I was, first 2 months, it's like, all right, you're going to spend a bunch of time in Europe. We're going to go to Asia. Like it was, I sort of sensed I was getting into that from talking to people that were at bigger firms. It was definitely, even with all the preparation, it was a major adjustment. And, I would say, I was in over my head probably for the first year, just trying to keep up. And then you figure it out, and you learn and dig in, and it worked out fine, but it's definitely a challenge.
So that initial belief that the sell-side research lifestyle was going to be a little bit more manageable than investment banking was not true to start.
I mean, I found, and I only spent 2 years in banking, so I don't know that I have enough experience to say this categorically, but I did find that in banking, the client made the choice, right? Like the client's got something going on, and you don't get to tell the client, I don't want to participate in your IPO, or your M&A transaction is not important to me. On the sell side, especially as I got to Citi, I had a research manager who basically it very much imparted on us: you run a franchise, you're gonna, if you have a successful franchise, you'll be successful here. I'm going to give you some best practices on how to run your franchise, but I'm not going to manage your franchise day to day. So I did feel like I had at least the ability to make choices, but no doubt for that first 12, 18 months, like I was working very, very hard, and as hard as I was in banking at the beginning. And then as you start to get control of it, and hey, what drives success in a franchise, what's maybe not as important, I started to, moderate it a little bit. But, I think it is hard to be successful at anything without just investing everything you have in it. You just have to figure out where everything you have is, and you've got to balance still other things, family and otherwise.
And when you think about the skill sets of investment banker versus research, and were there some things that you needed to upskill about? Was it managing 2.5 times as many people, or was it just dealing with the global travel? What were some of those?
Yeah, well, so when I moved from banking to research in my first firm. I was at Soundview for about 6.5 years. So there, I would say banking to research is, I think banking, especially the junior levels, is very quantitative. It's like you're running this analysis, that analysis. I think you move into research, even at the junior level, you start to understand there's more to understanding a business and a company than just the spreadsheets and the numbers. So I started to, I think, appreciate that. And that was a bit of a, actually enjoyed that transition. I think then moving from, smaller firm to bigger firm, I mean, there I had one associate working for me at my first equity research role, and it was very easy. And you can manage by micromanaging, right? You're like, this is what we need to do. Okay, you do this, I do this. Like it's very straightforward. You get a team of 4, 6 people, you have to start thinking about like, what is the plan, setting our team's goals, how do you contribute to those goals, really kind of more traditional management. So I would say it wasn't until I got to Citi and had, I think when I started, there were 5 or 6 on the team. Like I really had to start learning how to manage versus just doing. Like, and even early on, managing was an extension of doing.
Right.
And then managing, you're managing in all different directions, right? I think that appreciating that aspect of it as well is something I started to learn.
And that the aspect of it being a global firm, matrixed, and
Yeah.
a lot of people pulling you different ways of deciding who needs what.
Yep.
I would assume is very important in being successful at a firm like Citi.
Yeah, and you see it's funny, you see everybody's title and where they are in the organization, and then you really start to understand how the organization works. And there's like there's the org chart, and then there's how does our business work every day, and who do you need to influence to get done what you want to get done, which is more than just where are they on the org chart. So I would say learning that kind of soft side of managing and again, managing kind of laterally, managing up, that became much more important.
Absolutely. And so and how long were you at Citi?
I was there for 11 years.
Okay, so a long time to get your processes in place and understanding how to run the research side.
Yeah, I mean, it took me like really 18 months to sort of understand how it all worked, and then, then I think during that period, I mean, software really, just the number of companies, the amount of market cap just kept growing. So for the middle portion of my career at Citi, it was just trying to scale what we were doing in software because there were so many more companies. And then me, I think at the end we had a team of 9 or 10 people, and and then we had, okay, there's European software companies who've got colleagues doing Europe software, and how do we influence them? And then I took that part on, and then we tried to staff that back up. So just a lot of like scaling, like trying to scale what we were doing, which I would say was, I enjoyed that actually. I always enjoyed like there were new companies. There were, new people to kind of bring on board. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the franchise model, which Citi really, I think, did a really good job of like instilling in us as analysts that build your franchise to the best it could be. There's no limit. You can be the number 1 franchise within equity research. So.
And so you have this your team built, things are running smoothly. You're succeeded by any measure in the corporate world. What drove that change to, okay, I've done this, but let's think about something different?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first of all, like I had over the years, like it was a bit random, right? People come to me and say, oh, we're looking for this, we're looking for a head of finance, we're looking for IR, we're looking for, banks call, hey, I'm looking for an M&A banker. Like I had some random pings over the years, and sometimes they were from people like you respected, so you wanted to investigate it a little bit more. So it always had like a bit of there's other things out there. Maybe I'd consider something else. I think what it was a combination of 3 things. It was definitely like the travel was kind of a grueling lifestyle that was kind of always getting to me. The second was, and these aren't necessarily in order, but that was one of them. The second was I did kind of step back a couple times and say, and my wife would almost like ask me this, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want to do next? But more always in the context of equity research. And I just thought to myself, like, I don't want to manage the research department. I don't want to move into another role at Citi. And then I started to look at it from the perspective of, if I fast forwarded 5 years and I look back on those 5 years, like, what would I say? Oh, I learned this, I did this. And it did kind of get to the point in equity research where I just said, like, I don't know that the next 5 years look a lot different than the last 5 years. And, I didn't dislike the job, but it was like, what am I going to do over the next 5 years? What will I look back on over the last 5 years and say I did that? And then, the opportunity here came up, and it was like, okay, well, interesting. I investigated it like I investigated a few of the others. I was like, no, this is really, it's probably the first time I talked to a company where they really understood like what my skill set was. It wasn't like, I have this role, do you want to interview for the role? It was more like, I know what you do, we need help in that area, we should talk, right? So that, I think, set it up well. And so I decided to investigate it more. As maybe some that are dialed in may or may not recognize, like, a covering analyst exploring an employment opportunity at a company that you cover is actually quite a sticky situation that you have to go by the book. And so, even deciding I was going to seriously engage in that conversation, some of the other conversations I'd had were with companies I didn't cover. But if you're the covering analyst, you actually have to, it has to be disclosed in your research if you're pursuing employment with a company you cover. So I definitely took that step very seriously, but decided I wanted to do it, and went through the process here, and it fit the criteria, kind of what I wanted to do next. I looked back on equity research and said, what will if I do this new thing for the next 5 years versus staying in that for 5 years, what do I think? And I decided, like, I don't know what more I'll get out of the next 5 years in equity research. Like, I didn't dislike it, but decided to try something new. And I was 45, so you're like, at some point, if you're 60, you're not going to say, okay, I'll do something new. At some point, you say, okay, not worth it, maybe.
Right. And so in doing that, you likely built, it sounds like you built a very large network of people at all different levels, different parts of city, people that had left city and gone and maybe done the same journey. Did you go through that process of reaching out to your colleagues and friends that had done a similar move to get the real take, I should say?
Definitely. There were two city analysts and one analyst who was at Cowen that had all made a move from research into finance. And I talked to all of them, and I heard a very similar story. I didn't hear anything that scared me. And in fact, after I talked to all of them, I was like, this sounds like the right next move. So yeah, I definitely, like I said, even when I went from Cowen into city, like, spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it would look like. So I'm like a fairly conservative decision maker generally. So I would say, did all my homework, tried to learn as much as I could, and a couple folks were pretty helpful.
So, sounds like a lot of the CFAs on the phone, right? You do all your research, gather all
exactly.
the data, make a logical decision from there. And when you got over to Palo Alto Networks, here you're going from a financial firm to a technology firm. Was there a lot of culture shock of just how it's managed and how the people operate?
So I would say the biggest thing I heard in doing my work was in an industry internal role. It's a lot more about how, so I guess the summary would be almost everything that I experienced in terms of like difference, I heard or was kind of like warned going into the role. So, but probably the biggest thing was, it's not what decision is made, it's how the decision is made, the process by which a decision is made inside a company. I think as analysts and people observing companies externally, you just focus on like, what was the decision? Did they make the right decision? Internally, it's really more about how the decision is made, and if you're trying to get to what you believe is a right decision, how do you kind of plot the path to get there? How do you influence the right people? How do you bring the right data? I would say that was very much imparted upon me by folks that I talked to, and that's very much turned out to be a big difference between my old role and this role.
And has your management style or leadership style had to shift because of that?
Yeah, there's a lot more. Like at Citi, in equity research, you're like I said, you're sort of running your franchise, right? And you depend on other people for the success of your franchise. So you can't completely be in your own world, but you're much more you're much more doing your own thing. I would say in the roles, so I do investor relations, I do corporate development, which is our M&A. I was for the first 3 years doing some work, kind of core finance work, our long range plan. I managed a product finance team. In those areas, you're managing your team, but our product is not finance, right? At Palo Alto Networks, our product is a technology product, and finance is an enabler to us being successful in the market. So you're constantly, influencing others, working across other businesses. And I would say, I have had to develop that. I knew I would have to develop that. I've had to develop that, much more. And that's been almost like the key to having success here or not, has been my ability to kind of work more laterally with colleagues, which I didn't have to do nearly to the same degree in the equity research world.
And as people are dialed into this call thinking about, hey, maybe I want to make a switch. I work in investment banking, or I work on the buy side. I want to go to the corporate side. Any advice or thoughts of how they should approach that process? What skills might they not have that you're like, you have to be able to communicate well? If you're an analyst and you never talk to anyone all day, that is not going to work over here. Is there?
Yeah, I think it's hard to build out every skill you're going to need for the combination of the role at a given company and maybe the way the company operates. So I think what you're better off doing is to get in the door, understand what you do well, make sure you can represent that to somebody in a corporate environment, and then find the right fit for your skills. I think that's I think it's harder for me to say, oh, go out and take a course in this or develop this skill, because I think, for example, in IR, some companies are very heavy on the communications aspect of IR. It's almost like IR is an extension of corporate communications, right? Others, IR is very, very tied into finance and like the strategic finance role and things like that. So I think it is hard to say, this is the list of skills you need to build. But I think like the collaboration and ability to work laterally with other folks, I think is as I've already mentioned, kind of a much needed skill. I'm just not sure how you represent that as you go into a new role. So I think knowing what you do well and being able to articulate that, being able to align that with what a prospective employer needs, I think is important.
And how important at Palo Alto or another company do you think just industry domain expertise is? So if someone comes from a finance background in retail, is that going to translate? Maybe they're extremely good at modeling, extremely good at all that. Is the learning curve on the specific company actually a little bit easier than maybe some of the other skills?
I think I did this at a more experienced level, right? I think at a more junior level, I think there are, like we hire, for example, in finance, analysts and senior analysts and so forth, who might just have a given skill set that we wouldn't really care what industry they're in. I think at a more experienced level, I think it's harder to make a industry change and a role change. So I think making and I would say also back in equity research, like I saw people make industry shifts, but they're still doing equity research in a new industry, right? Whereas here, I feel like if I were to have gone into a different industry and tried to do what I'm doing now, make that shift, I think it's challenging. So I think you almost figure out what industries you know the best, and then figure out how your skill set, which you're going to have to explain to somebody why your skill set in equity research or in investment banking or on the buy side is relevant to their corporate role. At least you can talk the same industry domain knowledge and show your proficiency there. So I think it makes it harder if you're trying to switch industries.
The vernacular is the same, understanding what all those 3-letter, 4-letter, words are that people are sitting off.
Yeah. So the other thing, maybe I'd say, it's not a direct answer to a question you've asked, but it relates to this topic. So the piece that I find, like we've talked a lot about like what I've had to upskill, what I've had to do to kind of transition in. I think the piece that is lacking in internal, in the corporate world that I brought, that I think maybe I almost I was told this as I was going in, but everybody in the corporate world kind of has their, like, they're in treasury, they're in product finance, they're in sales finance. They sort of have their area. They have to collaborate with others, but they don't know a whole lot about sometimes these other areas internally. And they also have no idea sort of the outside world. So like being able to bring the outside in perspective, I think in finance, everybody's got the inside perspective. They don't have the outside in perspective. I think the more that's needed at a company, and the more you can demonstrate you have that, I think the more valuable you're perceived to be.
And on that, what was there other things that you wish you would have known when you were at Citi or as a publishing analyst that you learned once you got into Palo Alto?
Yeah, I would say when you're in equity research, again, you have your team, your franchise. Sometimes when you have to get something done, you just tell everybody we've got to jump on it, and it's kind of all hands on deck. Sometimes you do that repeatedly because that's just how it works. I would say in a corporate environment and with a bigger team that I have now, or or as the company's just growing quickly, you've got to be able to put process behind it and be able to scale. And I think I probably underappreciated that as I came in. And it's probably still the lesson I learn every day is, we're a growing company. There's we have to move quickly. You can't do that without process established. And sometimes you just got to step back and say, okay, we're not gonna. It's like ready, aim, fire. You've got to kind of put that process in place. I'd say I'm reminded of that constantly, even after being here for 3.5 years.
And being on the corporate side now, and maybe this is on the IR side, maybe it's on the M&A side when you're doing corporate development.
Yeah.
Is it a lot different having to interact with the CEO, CFO, and board of directors than anything you've done previously in your career?
I mean, I think a good equity research analyst has to distill down what their message is to make it simple and easy to follow, because you're often, as a sell side analyst, you're often dealing with like generalist type investors, not necessarily tech specialists that know all the acronyms. So I would say being able to do that is a skill that has worked well when dealing with the with our especially our CEO and our board. And I would say yeah, I've been able to leverage that. I've been able to leverage that reasonably well. I think I do have to constantly remind myself, I know whatever topic it is, I've spent, 100 times more time focused on it than the person I'm presenting it to. So you have to make sure that you're constantly remembering that. And I think that goes for even communication outside to investors, right? Sometimes the folks that I'm talking to, they kind of check in on us once a quarter, right? And you have to level set, make sure you're putting things in a common kind of framework and so forth that they can understand.
And were your communication skills, is that something that you just learned over time, being on the sell side, having to go out and talk to people all the time, or was that something you very consciously have worked on how to communicate?
Yeah, I think it's just happened over the years, right? And I don't think I'm necessarily an expert at this point, but yeah, I would say, our one of my directors of research at Citi said, he's like I listened to you on the morning call and software becomes so complicated. He said, listen to the oil team. When they come on the morning call, they say, oil's going up. Here's why you should buy this, sell this, and so I would charge my team at Citi with oil's going up by, I just had this joke, like oil's going up by software, but how do you make something that simple in software? And I haven't figured out what the analogy is to that in my world right now, but I think thinking about things that way, being able to explain it to your father, being able to put it in that context, something like that is helpful for just honing communication skills.
Being able to being able to talk to someone that doesn't know anything about the industry and convince them at the end of the day that this is something that they should be interested in.
Yep, agreed.
And then be able to pivot and talk to maybe some of the most sophisticated, hedge fund investors out there.
Yep.
And when you are, when you've kind of thought about the different segments of your career, right, or what your current responsibilities are, do you think of them holistically, or is it very much you have your IR team, you have your corporate development team?
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, my collective team's role is to make sure we understand what's going on outside the company and make sure we bring that perspective, in different areas of the company. So in corp dev, we spend a lot of time out meeting with startups, meeting with companies that have some scale, like trying to understand what is going on outside our four walls, and then representing that to our teams, and then helping them understand how what they're doing, how what's going on outside relates to what they're doing, because sometimes they're not that in tune with it. Similarly, on the IR side, again, in finance, everybody's focused on they might focus on, this part of it or that part of it. I think to some degree, bringing it all together and how does it get represented as a set of results that are digested by, the outside world is something that, we do. And then making sure they're in tune with where the outside, like, investor sentiment is and what other companies are saying and so forth. So I think bringing that outside perspective is something that's tied commonly across. I would say beyond that, like corp dev and IR, we've done a few acquisitions. When it's time to communicate the acquisition, like I have an advantage, but I don't think there's necessarily a synergy in those two. Beyond that sort of focus on the external world.
And you talked about managing expectations there and
Yeah.
bringing that in. How different is that versus the internal audience versus the external audience? And maybe on the external side, how different is that managing the long only, plain vanilla long-term holder versus some of the faster moving money?
Yeah, I think on the external side, the most important thing is to just make sure they actually understand what we're saying. Because I think if you think about it, like, we don't have the number of conversations happening in the investment community around our company, we're probably involved in 1% of them, right? The rest is like, a sell sider talking to a buy side, or a buy side talking to another buy side. Like, there's so many conversations going on around our company. We need to make sure that our message is out there and that it's understood by everybody. They may have an opinion that disagrees with our view of the market, something like that, but we want to make sure our view is out there. So I would say keeping it simple, keeping it consistent. Externally, that's where we focus, and we try to be very consistent across, like, long only hedge fund. We want everybody to know what we're saying. Their questions we have to answer may be different, but we want to make sure that it's very consistent. I would say externally, it's almost the reverse. There can be sometimes a lack of connection between the inside and the outside, and then if we don't help everybody understand what outside expectations are, they sort of operate in a way where maybe outside expectations don't matter. So we need to make sure that there's enough information internally such that people have that perspective. They almost won't make up their own story if they don't hear something. Whereas if we're not out with a consistent external story to investors, I find that the market will make up their own message if you don't have a message out there.
And it seems to be that communication is an incredibly important part of your role, both internally, externally, and doing that. Maybe to change the subject just
Sure.
slightly, when you were talking about how you're always thinking about the next 5 years, and you've been at Palo Alto Networks for 4 years?
Roughly? Yeah, 3.5. Yep.
3.5, 4 years. So we're coming up on that 5-year anniversary, maybe. When you think about the next 5 years, are you like, hey, look, I got a great life, company's, doing really well, really enjoy my job, built out my teams, things are going well.
Yeah.
Or are you thinking like, hey, you know what, maybe IR is the destination, maybe it's not. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say, like, and even when I was at Citi and I wasn't contemplating any change, I would sometimes just put together a chart and I would show this to my team. This is where I'm spending my time. This is where I think I should be spending my time. And how do I, and some of it was like personal preference, right? I wanted to travel less. So like, let's adjust my time. Part of it was like, this is what I'd like to spend my time on. This is what I'm better at doing. The team can do this other stuff. So I tend to follow this model of, I want to do more of what I like and want to do less of what I don't like, or more of what I'm good at, less of what I'm not good at. Or that's the wrong way to put it, because sometimes you don't want to you want to challenge yourself in areas you're not good. But so I would say, as I've thought about what I'm spending my time on in the job I'm in, and maybe thinking about what I want to do next, it's what do I enjoy, or where do I add more value? I'll focus more there. And so I've definitely, if I think about 2024 now versus I came in 2021, I'll give you an example. I took on a product finance team, which it was super interesting. I learned a lot. I don't know that that's my next, like, to almost like be the head of finance. Like, I don't know that that's my next role that I want to take. I thought coming in, I knew what IR was. IR has essentially lived up to what I expected, and it's been, I've enjoyed it. I'll enjoy keep doing it if that's part of what I do. The corp dev piece I think is really fun. I've always enjoyed understanding like external innovation, and so I've done a little bit of like, oh, I want to do more of this, less of this. That's kind of even how I think about the next role. Like, what there's things I know I don't want to be part of the next role, and there's things I'm spending more time on that I would like to double down on.
And when you're out thinking about, with the audience that's on here, adding members to your team, and this could have been at Citi, this could have been now Palo Alto Networks, or even earlier in your career, are there common traits that that people see when you watch interviews or listen to podcasts? Everyone's like, "Oh, be curious, be curious."
Yeah.
Outside of being curious, is there something else that?
Yeah, I would say I kind of bifurcate it in two segments of people to hire, right? You're kind of hiring, you're either hiring more at the entry level, or you're hiring more experienced, right? At the entry level, I actually got very, very good at that at Citi. You want someone, they've got to have a baseline level of skill set, right? So that's table stakes. And then you're really hiring for, are they hungry? Do we think they have a good work ethic? Are they gonna like the example I'd always use, if you throw something at them, they put it in Google and they don't find the answer, do they come back to you and say, I can't find the answer? Or do they keep, banging on it to find the answer and to solve the problem? Like that work ethic, that hunger, to me at the entry level, once I've established they have the baseline skill set to do the job I need, that's what I would focus on. And that's never failed as a hiring criteria for me. At the more experienced level, it really comes down to like, and this has been more here rather than in equity research. It's like, what am I good at and what am I not good at? Or what's going well on the team and what's not going well on the team? And then you're trying to hire for what you need, right? And what kind of person is that? Like I mentioned, I was probably a little light on the process side. So I have some really strong people on my team here that are process people. And one of them was here when I got here. One of them I've elevated because he's very good on process. So you compensate for what you don't have in your more experienced hiring, because they ultimately have to, they're driving the team forward. They're sometimes representing you when you're not there. Like you need to make sure you have that strength. So I would say I've only been here 3.5 years, kind of using that skill set. I'm probably not as good at doing that as I am, hiring hungry people at the entry level, but that's what I've learned so far.
And when you're looking for that feedback of understanding where your blind spots are, and I think this is important for anyone, no matter where they are in their career. How do you go about getting that critical feedback that you need? Is it from your peers, your colleagues? Maybe the CEO has no qualms telling you what you don't do well. Is there some process you go through in order to get that feedback?
So my style is I try to I feel like I should know that before anybody tells me that, right? I should be self-aware enough that I have a sense for what I'm strong at and what I'm not strong at. I would say then establishing with, with your boss, which is actually not that hard, right? If you tell your boss, don't beat around the bush, just when something's going well, tell me it's going well. When something's not going well, give me feedback. Like if you, and most bosses, they'd rather operate that way than have to, put on kid gloves and try to nuance something, right? If you just establish that with your boss, and then some are just naturally like that, right? They're just going to give you direct feedback because that's how they operate. But I think that's very helpful. I think if you help like your peers understand that you're open to that feedback, that's the next step. And then I think the hardest step is like making your team aware that you're also, you'll take feedback as well as a manager, right? And I think that's harder. That's both harder to communicate because ultimately, you're the manager. You don't want to have it be too much like management by committee. But I think if you're open to that, they know you are, and then they use it. They use it sparingly, but they know they can use it. I think that's all helpful.
No.
But I think you can get 75% of that from your boss.
Got it. And so if you were, coming out with a chemistry degree again, fast forward to today,
yeah,
would you be heading towards technology? Would you be thinking, oh, let's head towards finance because it gives you such a core understanding of businesses? How would you guide someone at this point?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a 20-year-old, so like we're talking this, and
Okay.
he's an electrical engineering major, and he's enamored with, he's really good at math, so he thinks options trading would be the most exciting thing in the world. And I think I think it depends on what type of person you are. There's some people that aren't going to end up in tech or finance or whatever. I think you figure out what you enjoy and what your core skill sets are. I think to be in most tech related roles, I think to be in finance, you've got to be quantitative. I don't think necessarily nobody looks at my chemistry major and says, oh, you're not qualified to be in finance, right? They always ask like, oh, how'd you get into finance? I think the mindset is, I'll catch myself using the term rate limiting step, which is kind of a chemistry, term. I think you just like, I started off in chemistry because I thought it was interesting. I thought there was a path there. I thought I knew what I wanted to do over the next 5 years. It turned out I didn't want to be in the lab, so I sort of adjusted. So I think you just keep going down the path that you find interesting, and definitely course correct as you go down the path. And you're never gonna know where you're gonna ultimately end up. Kind of where which turn you'll take in the next set of options you have down the path.
And as you were heading down your journey, was moving from city to Palo Alto, was that a defining part of your career, just in terms of what your next steps were, or not?
I think
not significantly. You're doing some over here, and
I think again, I think you're just on a bit of a journey. So maybe you, and I haven't thought about it this way. Maybe you retire, right? And you end your career and you look back. I would say there are a couple like forks in the road for me, and a couple people at those forks in the road that I look back right now and say that was a big moment. Like I actually enjoyed the investment banking work, and there was the first analyst I worked for, who's not in the business anymore. He really helped me understand where he thought my skills would fit in equity research. And he actually was kind of like, it was a weird time. It was like before all the regulation stuff. So he said, oh, you can try it out a little bit. You're a banker, but spend a little bit of time with me in research, and you can learn if you want to do this, right? He took the time to help me understand what equity research was about. I would say, there's just a couple moments in my career where I'd say that was a critical point where I decided to make a move. And it wasn't about the move I made. It was about the process of me making that decision. So in, coming in here, I did spend a decent amount of time with our CEO. Like, what do you think my role would be? Why do you think you need it here? And if it just would have been a job posting at Palo Alto Networks, like, oh, here's the job, take it, I'd be like, I don't know if that's the job I want or what, but helping to understand what they were solving for here helped me decide I wanted to take the role. And, I probably wouldn't have done it without that.
And it seems like people have been very key to your career and your journey, as they always are. Is there anything you do in particular to keep your network strong, or in terms of making sure when you're back on the East Coast, you're reaching out to maybe some of your former colleagues to grab dinner? Maybe you do regular conversations, with people. How do you think about keeping?
No, I'm smiling because we have like a private LinkedIn group of my my whatever 21-year equity research team, like the people that work directly for me in equity research, and we have a LinkedIn group. It's not maybe as active on the LinkedIn, but I'm in New York. I do dinner with that team, and it's been mostly New York. I kind of catch up with people one-off in other cities, but no, I enjoy that actually. Like they're all in, they're all in different spots. They're some are on the buy side, some are doing random things, private equity. So yeah, I've enjoyed that quite a bit actually. Just kind of staying in touch and kind of proud of it. Like there's 18 or 20 people in that group. So it's been kind of a fun group to stay in touch with.
And is that your key sounding board, or not, does it just depend on what kind of decision you're making?
Yeah, no, like not as much. It's interesting. Like a couple of them, yes, but a couple of them, yes, because I value like the perspective. I probably use others more than them. Like couple friends I have, my wife, like my wife's a very objective decision maker. So, I would say not as much. It's more just like learning from them, right? They're all doing different things. So you get to hear what they're up to and so forth.
What their experiences are and how they've managed their journey, right? So because it's
also just kind of practically, like think about like I spend as a research analyst, a team covered like almost 50 companies. I was on the morning call every day. You've had people telling you what's going on in the markets, and now I sit here, I read some research, but like I have a very narrow view of the world versus what I used to have. And so I actually use those types of people to just, hey, what's going on? Like what's going on with Microsoft? Why, stock's done well, stock hasn't done well. What's going on, right? I get to hear the pitch, and I actually can easily digest like what's the investor pitch. I hear that enough on things. I can kind of understand what's going on in the world. It helps me understand what it means for us. So I use it in very real terms.
Yeah, interesting. Are there any other, and maybe Tanya, I don't know if, are we bringing people on to ask questions, or would you like me to do some of the moderated questions?
We have some questions in the Q&A box. Fortunately, our audience can't unmute themselves, but of course, they're welcome to submit them to the Q&A box.
Perfect, thank you. So
yeah, do you see these, Jeff? I see a couple here. Like there's a question on a transition from IB into investor relations, and what would you highlight during the interview process? I think I mentioned this earlier. Like I think you need to understand what they're solving for, what a prospective employer is solving for, and how you can be the solve, right? And if you're not the solve, then maybe the role, maybe if you can't get that to match up, maybe it's not the right role and you find another role. But I don't know. I have specific advice for like a coverage banker, but again, I find that many of these companies do not have a very clear picture of what's going on externally. And as a coverage banker, you do have that view, so that might be a solve. But I think figuring out what their pain points are, what they're looking for to be solved, I think can be helpful.
And one of the other questions being asked is, how helpful has going through the CFA program been in your career in terms of either people you met, the knowledge base? How's that played a role?
Look, I was at a fork in the road in 2002 or 3, and I was trying to figure out 2001. I was trying to figure out, did I want to move into equity research? Did I want to do something else? I actually took the CFA level 1. I did, I studied for it. I did well. and I was deciding, do I want to do an MBA or just keep on with the CFA? And I decided, look, I like investment research. I like what I'm doing. I kept on with the CFA. I would say, along that sell side journey, as well as in IR, like people see CFA and they're like, oh, you must know this, and this. Like we can have a conversation using certain terms and speak a language. And so I think it's just been kind of a baseline that, I never wanted to like go into marketing or take a very sharp turn in my career from a business perspective where maybe I would have said, oh, I need to go get an MBA. So I think it's helped me more from just like establishing that baseline of credibility and being able to be conversant with folks.
And if you're looking at a stack of resumes that the HR folks have given you, do you like, oh, they have their CFA, or oh, they're
I think I did. In fact, the first 5 years I was on the sell side, I told everybody I hired, I said, you're going to start working on your CFA, right? Like, so I then kind of relaxed that. There were like, I started hiring people. They were married, they had kids. They're like, I'm keeping them busy. Like, I'm not going to mandate they spend then more of their time on that. So, but I did always value it on the sell side world. I would say in this world, it's not as directly. I think it helps, again, establish credibility. So if I were hiring at the entry level, there would be a number of things I would look at to help establish credibility. That might be one. I don't know that I don't probably look at it exactly the same way as I did when I was hiring on the sell side, though.
And that makes sense. I mean, when you're on the sell side, it's the curriculum is tailored for that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having the opportunity to have this call, and look forward to potentially doing something like this again in the future.
Okay. And Tanya, I'm happy to take if folks want to do these, like you send me these questions offline or something. Some are very a little narrow, but I'm happy to follow up on those.
Great. Well, and we'll take you up on that. So if any questions you have for Walter that we haven't been able to answer, please submit them through the info@cfa-sf.org email address, and we'll be sure to forward them over to you.
Okay,
And at this time, I just want to wrap up the webinar and thank you both, Jeff and Walter, for your engaging conversation. I found it very insightful and informative, and I hope our audience did as well. And we hope that everybody has a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.